Welcome to season 7, the first episode back from 7 Million Bikes, a Vietnam podcast. I'm your host, Neil Mackay. Today, my guest is a New Yorker. He's been in Saigon since 2010, and he's the co-founder and CEO of the Urbanist Network, which includes the well-known website Saigoneer, Urbanist Vietnam, and Urbanist Hanoi. My guest today is Brian Letwin. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
All right, so Brian, how's it going?
As good as it could be, no complaints. Just pushing through. It's here in the apartment, the mini prison, but full fridge. Got my 3-year-old daughter as my play partner all the time, and get to catch up on Netflix series that I've been neglecting for the last year or two.
So we're both obviously at the moment in Saigon in a lockdown situation, hence why I'm continuing interviews on Zoom. How's it going for you at the moment? We're not going to talk about it too much, but how's things with the current lockdown?
I mean, I guess there's the professional and the personal buckets. Professionally, the websites we run are not subject. I mean, they produce what they produce and it's content. And so there are departments within the company that are slower now. Let's say business development is probably one of those, you'd imagine, because a lot of our clients, restaurants, hotels, travel related things are just very few businesses unaffected by especially this current wave. There are a few, luckily, so there is still work being done and client work being done, but it's not what it was before, which is probably not particularly surprising. But yeah, otherwise, one nice thing about running a business like this is, it does afford a kind of a level of continuity and normalcy, whereas when the work is the same. So we might all be doing it remotely, but we're working full days. I mean, there's no difference in effort. Like I go to bed every night and I feel like tired. Like I feel like there was a full day of stuff. And again, having a 3-year-old helps because there's never a dull moment except for nap time, which is great. No, it's nice for that. So I'm thankful that our business is in a position financially where we're not having to make cuts and able to operate pretty normally. And then just also use it as a distraction and create some structure in the day, which as in my experience of, over a decade ago in New York, being unemployed for a few months after the 2008, 2009 financial crisis, being able to go outside at the time, it was extremely difficult to find structure and occupy myself. I don't know what that, to kind of go through a period of solitude with no work at all, and by myself, I don't know how mentally I would have dealt, or how other people who are in that situation deal with that. Honestly, I really don't know, but respect to them.
Yeah, I feel for so many people right now on so many different levels, but the people I feel for the most are those with 3-year-old children.
Well, I would feel a little bit worse with people who have kids a bit older, because at 3 years old, they're just old enough to be fun and have a buddy and have conversations with, maybe not super deep ones. We're not talking about crypto stuff, but
you couldn't talk to me about crypto, so
fair enough. But she doesn't understand what's going on. In her mind, she thinks she's on an extended play date, and she'll ask questions like, she'll take us at our word for some things. So she doesn't ask why am I not going to school? She was going to school for 5 months before this lockdown. And she just says school is closed. We told her that, and she accepts that as truth. And she doesn't really question it. She just thinks everything is closed. But she really hasn't quite yet, and I think we're right around the corner though, started asking why. Why are things closed? And that, of course, gets to be a more difficult conversation. The really nice thing though is she's completely oblivious to the stresses and the negativity and the scariness of COVID and the whole situation. And it's nice to be with somebody who just is wants to hang out and smile and play and listen to music and dance and jump around and watch dumb Disney movies and stuff. So very happy to be locked in a room with her for some months.
That's awesome. That sounds really good. One thing I have seen repeatedly mentioned is people appreciating being able to spend so much time with their kids at home, and especially at that age where you get to really see the massive development, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Everything is, you just have to kind of view your life as there's usually more positive than negative, hopefully. I think most people, a lot of it is how you decide to look at things, and stress is there, and stress is more now than it is normally. Again, I'm very aware that I'm in a very fortuitous situation of having a stock refrigerator. Everybody's healthy, happy. I got my first shot last week. No, objectively, I really have nothing to complain about. And there are moments that are tough, and you kind of maybe have a flashback to oh, I remember when I used to go outside or ride a bike or, to go to a movie theater, and you kind of slip into a momentary depression. But if you reflect on any kind of on a macro level, and you see where you are, you're all right, really though, it's fine to have those moments. That's an acceptable human condition. But it's nice to have a support system here and be in place mentally where those are fleeting moments as opposed to pervade, they're not all pervading in my life. So that's something to be thankful for.
Yeah, no, I feel very, very similar position. Describing pretty similar for me as well. I feel very lucky, very fortunate. Have those fleeting moments sometimes on a daily basis, almost exactly like you just described. And you miss things, but then you're yeah, it could be worse. So it's doing okay. I've been thinking about, I wonder, you're talking about, your daughter's at the stage where she can't ask why. And I wonder how those parents cope when they do have kids that are a bit older and you have to try and explain in a way that doesn't cause panic and fear and all of those emotions, but you still also have to explain something as to why you're stuck at home all day. Is that anything you've done any research into yet? I mean, I haven't bothered because I don't need to.
Not really. I think when the time comes, we'll do it. I mean, it's funny. We live along the highway in District 2. So ambulances. So we moved in this apartment in the end of May, June or maybe June 1st or something like that. And so the sound of ambulances has been all the time because they're going up and down the highway frequently.
We've noticed that as well. Yeah.
And and Luna, my daughter, she just loves ambulances. Her birthday happened a couple weeks ago, and we bought her an ambulance as one of her presents. She has no sinister association with them. For her, it's just a fire engine or a police car or something like that makes a cool noise and has lights. So there's just been weird, more psychological effects of COVID on kids that are not necessarily negative, but just very much you grew up in 20 years, hopefully, when we talk about these things, we'll be oh, you're a COVID kid, you grew up with ambulances because you used to hear them going up and down the highway. Yeah, my wife by accident once mentioned about COVID is a thing. I think there's something outside, and it's this is why we can't go outside. And my daughter associated with a monster, and so she's oh, where's the monster? And got scared. And then we're all right, let's not talk about it. There's no point. We're not actually going outside, so
that's what I would imagine would be the kind of challenge, right? Because you don't want to create that fear of this monster or whatnot. What did you do back in New York then, back in 2009, 2010, before you came to Vietnam?
I graduated from university, in 2006, and immediately got my first job in digital marketing, doing SEM campaigns and stuff like that. And then after a year or two of this, I moved to work for large agencies like Mediacom and things like that, doing digital strategy and media buying for brands like Volkswagen for their US models and stuff like that, which was very interesting in a lot of ways. At 26, I had $7 million budget to spend a year, which is just hilarious. As don't ever do that. And I mean, I know why they did, but it was interesting. I learned a lot, things that especially would be helpful when starting a website. Because at that point I was kind of learning how agencies, people who buy media, how they approach publishers. So kind of insider information of how that industry works and what people look for. And then after doing agency stuff for a while, I just got burned out. It was very valuable from a learning experience, but especially when the stock market crashed, went subprime stuff in 2008, 2009. They fired half the team to cut costs, but they didn't changed the workload. So we were working 70 hours, 80 hours a week or something, which, especially for a job you don't particularly like have a huge amount of passion for in the first place, it's not very sustainable. So I quit the agency stuff, popped around to a couple other like freelance jobs that paid well, but like were just to pay rent kind of things. And then found a couple other marketing jobs that I actually did like. One was working as like the marketing director for Style Wars, which was this documentary from the 80s about graffiti art. And it was kind of like, it's kind of known as the Bible for graffiti artists. It's like the first major film about it. And they were looking to restore the entire film, all the negatives and stuff. So there was a big push. We did all these screenings around New York to raise money to restore the negatives and things like that. So that was cool. And then moved here.
So what was it like then being in New York at the financial crisis? I mean, I remember that's one of the defining moments of my life when that happened. I was in Australia at the time. You would have, to be in basically the epicenter of it must have been very, very interesting and challenging.
Yeah, it wasn't like a September 11th level thing where you're like, I remember where I was and it didn't deeply affect every single person. I do remember though, there being, like I mentioned, like there was this layoff push. And I remember people getting called to HR that there was this kind of thing, because it was all cubicles, right? So you'd have a floor and there'd be maybe 5 or 6 different teams on the floor managing different accounts. And if maybe some accounts were less threatened by others by the crisis. But I remember, yeah, there was this people, would see people walking to HR and it was kind of this death walk. So I remember, yeah, like the people would get the call, like the whole floor would kind of know what was like something was up, and anybody got called in for anything, people like just assumed it was going to be the worst. And I guess sometimes it was, sometimes it wasn't. But yeah, I definitely remember like that feeling of dread and also not knowing how far it was going to go. I mean, I remember thinking like, oh, this was right when Obama had also, I think, just become president right around that time, and I was like, finally, like maybe the president will like hold accountable like the banks, like the people who created this. Like maybe there'll be this huge reform of the American banking system and like how like bailouts work, and people will get punished. And I think in the end, you can watch, I think, The Big Short or something like these.
It's one
these
of my
movies
favorite movies. Yeah.
It is excellent. But then at the end, right, they go through like what happened to everybody. Like this guy, there's like one guy, they do like the fake thing. They're like, these guys all went to jail and like all this got shut down. All this legislation was passed. And it's like, actually, none of that happened. Like one person went to jail. Like nothing happened. So I remember there being some hopefulness, but that was squashed pretty quickly.
Yeah, because there was, so that was then the kind of birth of the whole Occupy movement and Occupy Wall Street, and then that spread across the world. And I was on the fringe of the Occupy Melbourne movement, which spread out to Australia as well. And I remember being so hopeful at that time. I thought, this is it. The financial system is changing. The world's going to get back on a bit more of an even keel. It seemed like people were becoming more aware of how money worked, where money came from, how unequal the system was, or unequal the system was, and then just nothing happened really. And that actually has had a massive impact on my life. Like since then, and I would have been 28 in 2008. I was 26, so much more idealistic. We can change the world, and then definitely since then I've become much more like, if it didn't change after 2008, I cannot see how the current system is going to change at all.
Yeah.
So I've become
I'm equally jaded about these kinds of topics.
Yeah, I've become much more. Yeah, I can see when I'm younger, people talk about students being such a force for change, and now I understand why. Because when I was a student, you have much less to lose. You're much more idealistic, passionate, energetic. You've got more time on your hands. There's tens of thousands of students, so you are this powerful block. And then as you become older, you become, more jaded. You've seen things come and go that don't change. You've got less time on your hands. You've got more to lose. You've got money invested in the stock market all of a sudden. And you're like, I don't know if I need this change, which I feel I feel a horrible human being for now being that person.
Yeah, I mean, you got at a certain point realize you have to live in the world and make enough money to feed yourself and to put your kid or whoever your financial dependents are in a not terrible financial position. I mean, one of the great things my parents did was we were never rich, but my parents saved enough money and didn't spend money on nice cars and stuff growing up because me and my brother graduated from liberal arts schools with no student debt. That is something I'd like to be able to give, if nothing else, to my daughter, assuming that the university education system in 18 years or whatever, 15 years from now is similar to the one that we grew up with. I hope not, because it's kind of dumb in a lot of ways. And the financial inlays are not worth the product that you're paying for often. I remember one thing was like, over the years, I've done so many interviews, like hiring people, and you can put whatever like university on your CV, like nobody checks these things. So if you actually think of the value, of course, there's like going to liberal arts school, you get critical thinking and things like this. Like there are definitely valuable skill sets that you learn from going to a good university. But at the same time, like, is it worth, I mean, by the time my daughter, like, is it worth $300,000 at the end? Probably not. Probably it's worth like $30,000 or something, which is still a lot of money. So I don't know. I'm also very jaded about education industry, and the fact that maybe I have to call it an industry is already a problem.
Well, so I'm very fortunate. I'm on the cusp in Scotland anyway, where my education was free. So I have a 4-year bachelor's degree and I didn't pay any fees for that at all. I think it was means tested at the time. And I don't come from my family are pretty poor growing up. So I didn't pay anything for that. I did have some student loans, but that was more just for like spending money, which I pissed up against a wall and didn't do anything productive with. But in terms of my fees, but even if I had to have paid fees, it would have been like a couple of £1,000 a year or something like that at the time, which is again, 20 years ago now. So I don't know what that would be with inflation. But now, I mean, so I was on that cusp. It was a few years after I graduated, they started to bring in that you had to pay for fees and things like that. So I don't even, I kind of forget about that because I don't have kids yet, about the potential for that now in the future of being saddled with these debts.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, I have friends in their 30s now who have done fine in their lives. And I'm sure, I wouldn't say that they regret going to university or spending the money that they did, but like, yeah, like they're just every month, having to throw cash into this. And it's, again, I think it comes down to equal value, right? So if things are priced so much higher than the value of the product itself. So I don't think there's an issue of paying for university. But the prices are just so out of whack. I mean, there's so many charts of like the increase in the price of, especially in the US, tuition, American tuition, and the increase of wages and income of workers. And they're not even close to each other. I mean, the gap is just so large. So it's gotten a lot more predatory and it's just bad and not regulated properly. The US government, there's been all this talk of Biden doing like an executive order to forgive student debt, which would be really wonderful. And he should do that. But he hasn't. So, let's see what happens. But yeah, long term, I don't know. I hope that education turns into something more applicable and something that has more practical use cases in a lot of cases. I mean, I was a Latin American history major. So a lot of my degree, like context helped writing, there's skill sets within that. So like learning how to write and research and do things like that are all good. But that also means like probably 70% of my college experience or something, it hasn't really helped, particularly. I'd rather have just paid for the 30% than the other 70.
That's the thing as well that I think has gotten lost, obviously, in this hyper-capitalized society, is that there used to just be that you got a degree for the sake of learning. Degrees showed that you had a certain level of intellect, a certain level of dedication to something. You weren't necessarily specialized in anything, but you learned something. So I studied sports science and I loved my degree. Like I loved sports science. We did psychology, biomechanics, chemistry, physiology, all of it. And I loved it. And I've never really used it. And I've probably forgotten everything. But without that degree, I wouldn't be have gotten any of the jobs that I've gotten that are completely unrelated to sports science. I wouldn't be in Vietnam without that degree. So it's literally been one of the most important things that I've ever done, still to this day, but it's completely unrelated to the subject matter. And that's, and like what you're saying, you studied history of Latin America, right?
Mm.
That's obviously not your profession, but you learned something super interesting. And I feel like that's another problem, because with such a monetary value on your degree now, which is you're saying can be 300,000, no one's going to go and get a degree in Latin history, because they're not going to make, I mean, even if you get a job in a degree in engineering or doctor or lawyer or whatnot, the money is still not enough to pay back. So it's a shame that we're now maybe going to lose that, the passion for learning.
Yeah, there's a lot of, I mean, beyond like skill sets of critical thinking or research. I mean, something like Latin American history, like if you study Latin American history, you learn a lot about humanity, and you can also start to notice trends. So like you could say there's a lot in common with the history of Southeast Asia as there is with South America. And I mean, they're part of that is the US, you know, what they've done and like global international policy over the last 100 years or 200 years, but also just like, yeah, like humanity and if left to its own devices, and like, you know, just how it's not been that far away in time of like, you know, high levels of brutality and stuff. I mean, it's just, you kind of understand the world, and you lose some of your naivete probably from doing it. But even though it has no direct application to what I do, you certainly kind of get a crash course on human nature, if nothing else, which is, no matter what you do in life, is valuable.
Mm. And to go back to your point there about Biden forgiving the debt and whatnot, what we're about to see, you know, over the next kind of, I don't know, 10, 20, 30, 40 years is the biggest transfer of wealth ever in human history, right? From the kind of boomer generation to their children and whatnot. And that would be a real shame then. How much of that that transfer of wealth is just going to go to pay towards student debt? You know, it won't be used to anything productive or helpful in life. It's like, oh yeah, thank you, I've got all this money from mom and dad. Here you go, pay off my student debt.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, let's move on. So what then spurred you on? How did you end up in Vietnam?
I had a close friend from university who had been here for about a year and a half teaching English. And he came to New York on the way back just for the summer in the US, and stopped in New York on the way back to the West Coast where he's from. And it was right in that period where I'd quit my agency job and was kind of doing some freelance stuff. And he said, if you ever wanted to do something completely different, then this would be a pretty cool option. And he really loved being here. And I had never been to Asia before. I think the farthest this direction I had gotten was, well, on one direction, California, and on the other, like Kenya and Tanzania, I think was the farthest east I'd gone from that side. So Vietnam, of course, as an American, just through the lens of the American war experience for the most part. Maybe I did a quick Wikipedia search for some stuff, but I came in pretty blind in terms of understanding where I was going, which is fine. I don't regret that at all. And got here and with the intention to teach English. I remember signing up for the ILA training course, and started that after a couple of weeks of being here and like doing some motorbike trips with my friend Jake, who I just mentioned, and just kind of getting the lay of the land of things. And then, I don't know, halfway through I think it's a 1 month course. I think it's a 1 month to get your certification.
Yeah.
I was just like, well, I should caveat that with, I got my parents paid for the airfare. My graduation present from university was airfare and language school tuition, either learning a language or teaching a language. That tuition could go towards. And that was like the way that my parents would pay for the plane ticket to come. So I was like, all right, that's obviously what I'll do. And then halfway through the course at ILA, I was like, yeah, I don't want to teach English. Like I just came to me, and I didn't tell my mom or my parents until I think 2 years later that I never finished the course. And just stopped and was like, all right, I have this experience in agency work and marketing. Clearly there's something I could be doing that's more in that realm than teaching English. Not that I look down on English teaching. It just was, I'm not equipped for it. Like, I remember we were doing like the phonetic stuff where like there's the backwards E's and like,
Yeah.
I was just like, it became like math to me. Like, and I'm not good, like math is not a good thing for me. I've gotten good at like arithmetic and multiplication, mostly because of business development and running a business. You need to do some like quick shorthand stuff. So I've gotten good at like percentages and basic arithmetic and multiplication. But outside of that, algebra and anything above that level up kind of lost, and that's where that kind of got to. So yeah, that's how I ended up here and kind of started down that journey.
So how did you support yourself then in working if you weren't teaching English? Because at that point, I imagine there's too many opportunities.
Well, I had saved some money from my work in the States, and I remember going to the ATM for the first time here and looking at my balance and being like, oh, like, I'll never run out of money ever. Because if I have this many hundreds of millions of dongs in my account and pho costs 20,000 dong for a bowl, like clearly I'm good, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So then fast forward like 2 months and I had no more money, basically. So I had met who would be eventually be my wife, like a couple months after I got here. And she was like my impetus to stay. Like she was my motivation factor of like not wanting to go home. And also there was some element of failure of going back to the States after a few months as well. And I'm sure, yeah, like my parents loaned me some hundreds of dollars. But I remember they came to visit as well because they had never been to Vietnam before. And they were very active in the anti-war movement in the 70s. And so they wanted to, it was an interesting experience for them to come here for a place that they knew so intimately through their activism. And I remember that when they were here, I was applying for a job at the Word magazine as the online editor. And that was the job. Like, if I got the job, I would be able to stay in Vietnam. And if I didn't get the job, in all likelihood, I probably would have had to go back to the States. And luckily, I got the job. And that was what enabled me to stay and kind of started my path towards where we are today, in kind of directly and indirectly at the same time.
Awesome. It's interesting. So it was still 20,000 a bowl of pho back then, 2010. It's not gone up too much. I mean, depends where you go, I guess. My guest on the last season, Michael Brzozowski, who's up in Hanoi, he first came here, I think it was 20 years ago, and he remembers getting pho for 5,000 dong a bowl. It's one of these things as well that people, it is obviously quite very inexpensive to live here, but people do. I saw a meme come up this week, be like, I'm going to go to Vietnam and live on $1 a day. And it's like, $1 a day gets you like a bottle of water and a bowl of pho if you're lucky. So I think you can think it's super cheap here, but like you still spend money. Like money still goes. Like, and if it's not coming in as well, then it's gonna go pretty quickly. So the World magazine, I remember that I first got here just over 5 years ago. That's not in existence anymore, right?
No, when I first got here, and I guess when this is universal to when you arrived as well, there were a number of, I guess, generally successful because they lasted so long. Expat focused magazines, print magazines especially. So there was The Word, there was Asia Life, Oi magazine had just started when you got here, I guess. And Asia Life and The Word had come from the same magazine called like Saigon Inside Out or something like that. I don't remember. And there was like a paradigm shift, and one person went one way and did Asia Life, the other went the other and did The Word. And none of them exist any longer. In fact, I think all of them but Oi ceased to exist before COVID even started. Oi was a casualty of COVID to some degree, it seems. But the others just never made the print to digital leap, or tried but did it too late. And to go from a print team to a digital team is not something you can kind of snap your fingers and do particularly easily. It's such a different world.
Because I remember when we arrived, finding those magazines in either bars or wherever, seeing them about and being quite interesting. But I do remember, so when we got here, Saigoneer was basically what people would talk about was you got to check out Saigoneer. So That it's definitely, obviously, probably the most well-known expat English language, and I know it's expanded more now, but English language website in Saigon and in Vietnam. So tell us more about then. So how did you go then from the word to creating Saigoneer?
Well, so the word it's one of those things. Just as a person that you need to do is you kind of take the good and leave the bad. So there were a lot of from HR management to product stuff to just getting the lay of the land of like what it is to be publishing something in Vietnam. There's a lot of nuance to that across all of those things, especially as somebody who had never done any of those things before or run a business anywhere before. So what happened? Well, yeah, the word it became. I mean, I left I got a much better job offer to do marketing for another company, and over time, the Saigoneer started because in New York and in the West, most cities have very hyper-local content websites. And the word, while hyper-local and all these expat magazines, they were very much expat magazines. They were like, how to drive a motorbike and how to order different kinds of suits and things like that, which were really, really valuable for your first month or two here. But after that, they didn't hold a ton of value. Maybe an article here or there was interesting and you'd read it. But other than that, you kind of didn't want to be, you kind of felt like you were a tourist, and that's not as as you get to be a bit longer term of an urban resident of a city, you want to feel a bit more of an insider than being spoken to as like, okay, I know how to drive a motorbike now. I don't really need to read about that. And what I noticed was I was finding just through research of just being an interested person. And I'm someone who I find value in learning as much as I can about the city in which I live. So in New York, I would read lots of books. I'm a nerd of kind of like, I like to walk down the street and imagine what buildings used to be there 100 years ago and, how things got from there to here. And I couldn't find much info. Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt you. The fact you're just saying that literally is just Saigoneer to me then. Like that's literally what the content, when I see it, when I look on the website, it is exactly that. So anyway, sorry, that's really cool to hear that it comes from that place. So sorry, on you go.
That's all right. And then I started finding things that I thought were really, Vietnam and Saigon have tons of layers. If you want to start going to paleontology analogies, but a lot of them, because of for the reasons that there's so many interesting layers, a lot of them haven't been excavated because of those layers themselves, that there's a lot of personal and political and, there's a lot of drama and negativity and positive. There's a lot to unpack there. And because of that, a lot of them are kind of been left to lie in a lot of, or the knowledge is dispersed in ways that are not very accessible. So I would just start to do deep dives on certain topics, and I'd ask my foreign friends, like, do you know about this thing that I just found out? They'd be like, no, never heard of that. Then I'd ask my Vietnamese friends, hey, have you heard of this? Or like, we have no idea what you're talking about. And so then it kind of became clear that whether it was historical things or up and coming cultural things, or even like a new building being built or an old building on the corner, like there was just a complete lack of information or documentation about all of this stuff. And I was like, okay, well, like I kind of know how to write some stuff and website things, and I'll just kind of start a blog about this. And I think the domain I wanted was like Saigonist or I don't remember, something like that. And GoDaddy was like, nah, like somebody has that. What about this and this and this and this and this? I was like, no, that's stupid. That's stupid. Saigoneer, EER. That's like Pioneer. I can make that work. So completely pulled out of the ass of GoDaddy, the brand, to some extent. And that's where it kind of all started. And then my wife, who's Vietnamese, had lived in Spain for a while and kind of retained her interest in Spanish culture through speaking Spanish and through Latin dance and things like this. And also through staying in touch with the Latin community here and the Spanish community here in Saigon. And so one of her close friends named Alberto was an IT guy and was getting his master's degree here. And we just one day had some drinks and mentioned, he's like, how you doing? I told him what I was doing. And we had lived together briefly for a period earlier. And it's like, I'm doing this thing. He's like, I'm also like very interested in that. So he became the IT guy, and I did all the front end stuff and the writing and the social media. And then it just met in a coffee shop at Decibel, which no longer exists. This kind of bar and cultural space on Phan Khai Binh Street in District 1. Every day after work, we both had full-time jobs for like maybe 8 months. And then in April 2013, a month after I got married, we launched it. And that's the very long roundabout way of answering your question, I think.
No, that's awesome. That's not, I could get, that's not long at all. I could listen to more. I thought, so did you invent the word Saigoneer? Because I assumed that was already a term for someone who lived here.
We got really lucky with that. So no, it was an invented term. This term, as far as everything we know, like didn't exist. Like I said, like literally GoDaddy told me to do it. And yeah, it's kind of, it just worked naturally. I mean, there's been points now where like some New York Times articles, when they interview people and about Saigon, they use the word Saigoneer instead of Saigonese, which is the correct term to be using.
That's what I was going to say, though. I've used the term Saigoneer I'm pretty sure, on my podcast description, on the blog posts, or even just in general chat, like to describe someone from Saigon. And I didn't realize it was that you guys had come up with that. I thought you'd taken that term and used that for the website. And I love the combination with pioneer as well. That's awesome.
Yeah, it worked out. The one negative, though, is when we started Saigoneer, there was no expectation for it to become a business, let alone something that would be expanded upon in terms of entering different markets and different languages, as it has. And so a couple of years ago, when we started Urbanist Hanoi, was when we realized we had to have like a universal brand that was still hyperlocal. So you insert, so Urbanist Vietnam, Urbanist Hanoi, even that got a little bit, because we also didn't plan on doing an Urbanist Vietnam or anything in Vietnamese until COVID. The plan was to do international expansion into Taipei and Singapore and Seoul and all these other places, which is still the plan when COVID eventually ends. But we decided that Urbanist was a good constant brand where you could fill in the blank as well with the geography as the sub brand, and describe properly the kind of content that we publish. So that's great. The problem is that Saigoneer, in reality, it can't really conform now to that branding style, which is fine because it has the power. We wouldn't want it to be, but it does make it a bit more complicated to explain sometimes the branding exercise of stuff.
That makes sense. So Saigoneer definitely wouldn't work in Hanoi then? You've tried that?
I think the reason that you laugh explains, I think you've answered your own question.
Yeah, I'm joking. It would be pretty funny though if you try be like, wait, what? Yeah, that I can see that challenge, because I've obviously noticed the expansion to Urbanist and whatnot. And it does kind of just sit separate, doesn't it? The Saigoneer, but you can't give that up, obviously, at all. No. So how's that expansion been then? So give us more about that. How did this come from starting off a small blog to then becoming what you are in Saigon and expanding?
So yeah, we started and we hoped that people would like it, and after a couple of years, it started to take off in terms of brand recognition and traffic and things like that. And then we kind of got overconfident about it and we quit our jobs, thinking like, if we just work full time on this, like we'll make money in no time. That didn't happen. So that took another basically like 2 years of just hustling a lot to just barely kind of make ends meet and do a lot of other projects to make up the difference as well. So that got us to like 2016, 17-ish. No, I guess 2016. And we just started to make enough money at that point where when I went to the US for a summer, I hired this woman named Dana, who had been the editor-in-chief of Asia Life before, and she had quit already at that point. And so I hired her just to fill in for me while I was in the States. And I remember her starting, she's like, okay, where's your style guide? And like, where's your editorial schedule? I'm like, I don't know what either of those things are. And she was like, oh my God. All right. So when I got back from the States, luckily, again, we had just enough money to where we were able to hire her, because we realized like we had no standards for anything. I mean, like we got just far enough with me writing everything, with some freelancers and some other resources here and there. But that if we're ever going to kind of take things to the next level, we needed somebody who was a professional editorial writer and editor to come on board and standardize things and make a professional shop, at least on that level. So we luckily were able to work with Dana, I guess, for 2 or 3 years. She was the editor in chief, and she was perfect because she was young, even though she was Canadian and white like us. She was fluent in Vietnamese, so she was able to kind of have that extra level of access that I do not have. So that was a really good hire for us. And then she brought on some people who our current deputy editor, Coy, he was an intern at Asia Life. So then she brought him over just I guess now 4 years ago. And he's made his way up and is pretty much running the show with Mike and the other editorial staff these days. But I just fast forwarded a bit. So then it hired Dana. Dana freed me up to do more business development and make more money a bit and work more on marketing. And that just kind of took off over time, got, again, more brand recognition. Also, digital marketing was still kind of in its infancy here. I remember my first meetings with like the Sheraton and these kind of marketing people and them being like, all right, like what's digital marketing? And having to not just sell the website, but also sell people who had been doing print for 15 years or whatever they'd been doing. Luckily, that has changed drastically over the years. Then we just started hiring more people, more writers, more copy editors, more video people, photographers, hiring, accountants and executives and things like this. And then in 2017, we raised, I guess you'd say, pre-seed round from 500 Startups Vietnam, which is a major VC entity here, especially now they've gotten very big over the last few years. So we were one of their early investments, which gave us enough money to expand to Hanoi and also launch a Korean language version of Saigoneer, which we currently still operate, to market towards the Korean readers in Saigon. And of course, there are tons of Korean families and business people here. So that's why we did it for them.
What is the number? Do you know the number of, I would guess, I have no, there's 10 to 20,000, or is that too much? Or
oh no, it's higher. It's something in the realm of like 80,000 or something.
Oh, well, I thought there was only like 80,000 expats total.
It's all over the place. I should caveat that with saying like the numbers are very.
Yeah, it's hard. I've looked up before and I've never found an answer. Yeah,
there is no good answer. That's just kind of based on a bunch of other numbers that I've seen kind of taken the highs and the lows and averaged them out a bit.
Yeah. Because it's easy to, from our, obviously, Western-centric viewpoint, but over the years you realize, well, yeah, there's massive amount of Koreans, Japanese, Indians, and you see it, I think often even in the Vietnamese media, they talk about expats. I don't think they're entirely including all those kind of people. They're talking about Americans and Australians and British people and things like that. So I've tried to kind of look at to see how many expats are there actually here, because it's a massive catch-all term when these are all definitely different subcultures, not subcultures.
Oh, yeah.
Subcultures, subsections of the expat community,
Indeed. Yeah, they're completely different. The content we do on the Korean website is similar, is overlapping with the English stuff, but it's not the same. There's stuff we pick and choose. Like we don't write about street food very often on the Korean website because Korean expats generally would prefer to eat in restaurants, things like this. I guess that pretty much, so that's where those other websites come from. It's also around this time that, even though we write in English, most of our readers are Vietnamese. So it became this kind of thing, which again is from the day we started it, it was like, we are not going to make an expat website. Every piece of content tested will somebody who grew up in Saigon find this interesting, or will they feel like it's just a bunch of white people writing about Vietnamese culture on a very basic level? So to that end, we try to work with Vietnamese writers as much as possible, or the expat writers that we do work with have been here for an extremely long amount of time and go in depth. There's not a lot, and that's in general what we kind of try to say is our product, is that we're a premium publisher in a market where there's not a lot of time or money spent on creating high quality content. This is a market of like one and done, quick, make as much content as possible place. So that's kind of the space we occupy. And then when we couldn't do our international expansion plans, that was the philosophy was in Vietnam. Now you have this large young Gen Z or young millennial kind of class coming up with higher spending power, and they're more sophisticated, educated. You can see their demands in terms of like consumer products and things like that. And we thought, okay, well, then there should certainly be a space for a media entity that is also focused on premium quality and writing about things they're not able to find in other publications, and that it takes a bit more of an academic kind of perspective. And we definitely deal with pop culture and things like that on the Vietnamese website, on Urbanist Vietnam as well, and on Saigoneer. But we really try to make sure that it has some level of value, and in the best case scenario, some level of social value as well. I mean, if nothing else, then creating a space or for people or for ideas or for history or something that wouldn't otherwise exist or have a voice, and that can only just help to enrich kind of the cultural landscape of the place. And if that's the best we do, then that's fine. But we don't think we're changing the world necessarily, but we're certainly trying not to detract from it. We're trying to add something, even if it's not maybe curing cancer or COVID or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, we can't all cure cancer, can we? I know it's difficult sometimes. You always have to have that perspective of what you're doing. You're like, but you just whatever you're doing in the world or creating, you're making a difference somehow. We can't all be, changing the world in terms of curing cancer or whatnot. No, but that's amazing, and it's really interesting to hear that background, because as someone who has been here since 2016 and even visited before then, you can see exactly the philosophy coming to fruition, and you're fulfilling a good space and providing that good information. So it's really interesting to hear you describe it, because that is exactly what I see on the website. It's not like what you're saying. They're like, oh, okay, yeah. It's like, oh yeah, no, that's amazing. And it's exciting to see as well, for 7 Million Bikes, it's just started off as a little hobby podcast, and now it's becoming into something bigger, and it's exciting to see that there is a path to doing that. I've not really thought much further ahead of next week at the moment, but as the times kind of dictate. But it's exciting to see that what you guys have done and created. And then you guys obviously have a podcast. You are the OG podcast in Saigon. You guys have been going the longest, and you would have been, I imagine, I've always put you down as the first English language podcast in Saigon or in Vietnam.
I think that's right. At the time, that was kind of part of the impetus to begin it was, of course, like Mike, our editor-in-chief, was like, let's make a podcast. And I think he pitched it, and I think it kind of got swept under the rug for 6 months or something. And then sometime later it's like, yeah, like, let's do it. And we're like, all right, like, it's fine. It didn't come from a place of like, oh my God, like, let's do it. It's turned into something that we're really happy with. But I think it's exceeded our expectations in terms of something that people like, and a space for us to kind of chat and have some fun, and just kind of be ridiculous. So yeah, we're really kind of happy. But yeah, I think we started in 2017. So at that point, I don't think there was really one. Honestly, I couldn't tell you if there was another or not. I don't remember. I don't think we did much competitive research at the time. We weren't thinking about it as a product as much as just something to complement everything else.
Well, I started 2019, and again, it was just a hobby, and I just looked to see what else was out there, just out of interest, not like competition or anything like that. And the only thing I could find at the time was Saigoneer. And then it's one of these things like, like parallel thinking, because suddenly within the space of like a few months of my podcast starting, there was like 2, 3, 4 more started up. Like there was the Bureau podcast, Creators in Saigon, Falling Jackfruit came next, which I think is not producing episodes anymore, but they're still available. Then there was the Sexy Meat Talks one, which is they've kind of stopped now.
Yeah, I remember that one. And
there was a couple others, I think. But yeah, so I'm just doing some research right now. I'm putting out some articles about podcasting. I don't know if you saw, I just included a post including the Saigoneer podcast, and I'll be in touch with you and the team shortly, because I'll write up a little bit of a maybe like kind of history of the podcast or whatnot. I've just written one right now about the Bureau. So let's move on. We'll move on to the final questions. I always love one of my favorite things about a podcast is we could talk all day, but I'm not Joe Rogan. I don't want to do 3-hour podcast episodes. So thank you so much for your time. Before I ask the final questions, tell us what's next for Saigoneer and tell us all about the Urbanist. Where can they find you? Where can they look it up?
Sure. So they're all the websites of the names of the things. So Saigoneer.com. You can also find us on all major social media channels. UrbanistVietnam.com is the name of the Vietnamese language version of our website. It has a different set of content a bit. And then Saigoneer, on any of our websites, there's a toggle, a little globe icon at the top of the website, and you can navigate to all the other websites through that. UrbanistHanoi.com for the Hanoi site. What's next? Well, on a business perspective, I'm really trying to find ways to come out of the lockdown in a really good situation, so where like things are kind of done enough in the background that when the lockdowns are complete and things get opened up again, we can really rock and roll. That the restart period is very short, as opposed to like starting only when things start to open up. Mm-hmm. So I'm trying to get all my ducks in a row now. So like I mentioned, like we're currently as busy as we are normally when there is no COVID happening.
Awesome. Oh, well, I'm excited to see how it goes. I'll obviously be keeping an eye on it. And thank you very much as well, because you've supported 7 Million Bike with our events this year, and you've been featuring them on the calendar, which is awesome. It's good. It's really exciting just to see our own little part being featured on such a big platform like Saigoneer, something that I've known about since I got here. So that's meant a lot to me. So that's been really cool.
Happy to do it.
Thank you so much. And I meant to say as well, so I first met you when I popped into Eddie's one time to see Brad. And I've been cursing Brad since then, because he's probably called you this. He called you Brian Letwin.
Uh-huh.
And now I can't bloody get that out of my head. I've always known your name was Brian Letwin, but he said it to me. I'd already been talking to you about coming on the show, and he said, "Oh, you should have Brian Letwin on the show." And I was like, "I don't know who's that." He's like, "Brian Letwin," and I was like, "I have no idea who Brian Letwin is." And he's like, the Saigoneer. And I was like, "Oh, Brian Letwin," and he's like, yeah, I call him Brian Letwin." And I was like, "Oh, geez." So now I can't get that out of my head anytime I see your name written down.
Yeah. It's amazing how often that happens, and it only happens with one demographic, which is typically like American men over 50. I don't know what it is about it. I really I couldn't even start to explain it. Luckily, Brad is a gentleman, and he can call me whatever he wants. I don't really care. That's
fine. So we'll finish on to these final questions. So they're different for most seasons, so I've changed them up from the last season. And we try not to talk too much about COVID, but they're a little bit lockdown related. So number one, obviously, we are in lockdown. We can't go anywhere at the moment. We're stuck at home. This is 7 Million Bike. If you could get on your bike or any bike, where would you go right now and why?
So I thought about this probably more than any of the other questions on this list. Like I'm getting older, and so long road trips don't really appeal to me. So my answer is kind of based on comfort. And an underrated place, I still think is underrated, which is Vung Tau. I really like Vung Tau a lot. It's not the best beach in the country by any stretch of the imagination, but as a whole, it has a lot going for it. It's quiet generally. It does have a nice coastline. There are like some cool historical vestiges to explore. The F&B scene is not particularly robust, but has some good stuff going for it. The seafood is incredible, which is a big deal. And it's close. It's just a couple hours drive. So I think like, yeah, once lockdown is just like, let's just go somewhere. Like, let's just get there as quickly as possible. I don't think I'd want to go to a resort or anything, because that's just another, like walled in. I don't want to exchange my small prison for a bigger prison with better food. Well, maybe not even better food. I think I've been cooking a lot, and I've gotten a lot better at cooking the last 2 years. But yeah, that's my answer. Vung Tau for the win.
Yeah, I agree. It is underrated, and I'd heard just nothing but really negative things about it when we first arrived. And then when we went, and I've heard stories that those negative opinions come from a long time ago, maybe plus 5-10 years ago. I heard it was a bit of the Wild West down there. But It's a nice place. It's not like you say, yeah, the beach isn't great. It's fine, but yeah, I like it, and it's close as well. It's definitely not as bad as I think its reputation precedes it. So we've been in this lockdown now on different levels for nearly 3 months, I would say. So June, July, yeah, nearly all of August. What's been the best thing about lockdown for you?
Yeah, two very obvious things. Time with family. On a couple levels. One, the daughter, like you mentioned before, it's just great to be. That's probably the biggest singular silver lining of this all is that in general, before COVID, so busy all the time that I'd see my daughter for 30 minutes in the morning before she went to school. And then in the best case scenario for maybe 2 hours after getting home from work and being tired after work too, and things like this. And then, usually say 3 nights a week, I'd have some after work thing, some client thing or some event to go to. So even then I wouldn't see her very often. And now for better or for worse, definitely for better. She wakes up at between 5:30 and I hate her for that, and 7 at the best case, and that rarely happens. My current best case is more like 6:30. And the deal with my wife is she takes care of her if she wakes up in the middle of the night, because I'm a fussier sleeper. My wife can pass out again pretty quickly. And then I am the one who puts her to bed at night. And when she wakes up in the morning, I'm the one who hangs out with her. So wake up with her at like 6 or whatever. Go maybe take her outside for a walk for a little bit or play with her, watch some baseball because 6 a.m. coincides with East Coast baseball start times. Make breakfast and then do some exercise in the morning. And then with her, until her nap time, my wife and I switch off like office hours in this room, where the other person works in the living room, kind of half working, half babysitting. She takes a nap for like an hour and a half. And then that takes us to like 8 o'clock, 8:30, 9 o'clock at night. And then I have like an hour or an hour and a half to watch some bullshit like we mentioned before. And then I go to bed. I'm too tired to like stay up to like when I get to 11, I'm like, oh, I'm really pushing it. But it's great. It's wonderful. She's hilarious. She's an easy kid, all things being equal, especially for someone who's not able to like go out and expend their energy. Not to make a comparison, but as a dog owner, you know that like if they aren't able to release some of this stuff, like it manifests in other ways. And so we put her on the balcony and she does this thing called gymnastics where she goes up on the drying rack, which is like the metal drying rack of clothes. And she just like a little monkey just climbs up and down and like does these like really what she thinks is like Olympic level. She do like these one-handed kind of like this and like, have her legs out at the perfect posture for about an hour. And then she comes in drenched in sweat at like 5 o'clock. And it's pretty great. And then spending time with my wife is also wonderful. I think we've, to both of our credits, done a good job of respecting each other's space and realizing that this is a difficult time for any couple, and that we have to be a little bit more lenient than we probably otherwise would with each other and each other's habits and things. So it's been overwhelmingly positive, and spending also more time with my parents on video chats as well. We've been doing more of that. So whereas we used to talk to them like once a week, now we talk to them like at least once a day.
Oh, wow.
Which is a big
that's cool.
difference. Yeah.
Nice. So what on the flip side then, what's been the biggest challenge for you during this time?
On the personal level, just like watching my kid not being able to like go to gymnastics class or interact with other children or go have play dates or go to school or, to spend time outside and be a kid. That's hard. I think it's harder for me and my wife because we know what the potential could be compared to Luna, who is, again, just like kind of unaware of things. She's just happy to hang out with us and, pretty occupied just playing with crayons and things generally. The other artists, it's just work. Like our company has done a really good job, and our staff of being professional and maintaining their output and being like, we don't micromanage at all. Like we have weekly check-ins for editorial and social media and like different things like this. But everybody, despite the mental challenges that everybody has throughout the company, living with their parents or their significant others, have done a good job of plowing through. But at the same time, we're a very family-oriented company in that we see each other. Like, I have a feeling, I don't know if they'd admit it or not, that a lot of our staff the company overlaps as like their more immediate friendship circle as well. And I feel like that way, as much as a boss can, like I try not to, to be aware of that kind of, if you have to make tough decisions, you can't be friends with everybody. Luckily, our staff are so good and senior in the way that they think and self-manage themselves that I've been able to kind of become more friendly with them, because the times where you'd have to be like, sit down and have a serious conversation, like don't really exist very often. So the need to oh, well, if I have to be a dick about something, I need to not be as friendly with them. To their credit, like they've made it so that kind of situation never really occurs. So thanks to them, I guess, for letting us kind of be friends and a family together and have that mutual respect for one another. So not being in the office and hanging out, having beers after work and just having these conversations and, trolling each other in person. We do it online, but it's more fun to troll in person than digitally. That's been difficult. And I miss those guys so much. Talking on Slack does not replace the human interactions. Shit, I mean, I even miss my clients at this point, like having client meetings and stuff.
So you've been here now, obviously, a long time, 2010, over a decade. What has shocked you the most about Vietnam?
Yeah, I think your next question is what surprises. So right, it's shock and surprise. And my answer is kind of the same to both of them, which is at this point, I spent like 30% of my life here. This is normalcy to me. So nothing really shocks or surprises me anymore. I tried to think of this when I saw the question when you wrote it down. It was like, if I was from Cleveland or something and I moved to Detroit, and would anybody ask that question? Like, it's like, no, I mean, like, it is the new normal of life. And oh man, that has entered my lexicon. Luckily, I'm not applying that to a COVID related thing. But yeah, I'm not really shocked or surprised by anything anymore. Maybe that's what's shocking and surprising, is that this is normal. Like, that's somewhere this far away from where everything started, is now my home, way more than what I associate New York with.
Well, I guess, I'll ask you a follow-up question, but in 10 years, life has changed so immensely here, because I know how much it's changed in 5 years. And my wife and I were talking about this just this week. When we first moved here, I remember she asked her sister who lived here, what are we going to miss? What do we need to eat before we get here? And she was like, wine and cheese. You need to eat wine and cheese before you come here. And this was 5 years ago, because it wasn't really that common. Now, though, sure, I can buy some nice cheese at Vinmart. There's wine, depending how much you want to spend. You can get decent wine anywhere, as long as it's not Dalat wine. So I guess that's interesting, your answer, though, that nothing shocks you anymore, because I'm sure when you first arrived 10 years ago, what shocked you the most then 10 years ago or 11 years ago when you arrived?
Oh, man. Maybe the driving situation. Not like the busyness of crossing the street. I mean, certainly that had its own. The first couple of weeks I was here, like, holy shit, like, how don't people die? Sure. Yeah. I think everybody goes through that. I think people coming from the Mekong Delta also feel that way, maybe when they come to live in Saigon for the first time too. I don't think that's a Western thing necessarily. Probably kind of the lack of structure coming from America, where everything is there's not a lot of opaque social stuff. Like, everything is kind of set. Like, you walk on this part of the sidewalk and you drive this way down the street, or you are allowed to do this or that, or if you don't, you get ticketed really quickly. Everything was just a bit more casual here, and still is, I think, overall. Some things have been formalized more than others. I remember the food thing, that it was hard to get a hamburger or a burrito. There was very specific places to get these things. Parmesan cheese, things like this. Now, I don't think there's any product. Because I measure it based on what I would bring home from the States when I'd visit. I'd go to the shopping and I'd bring cheese and canned artichoke, hearts or things like this to cook. Now I'm thinking, because we're thinking of going to the States for a few months in the near future, and I'm thinking from a food perspective, what we would bring back. Probably a few things that are still available here, but the price is triple or quadruple than they are in the States. So it's more of a monetary thing than not being able to find it.
Oh yeah, because we've got like cheese puffs right now, which are just so delicious. It's like a lockdown treat. But like it was just yesterday, I think they're about 100,000, 110,000. And I was saying to Adrian, we're not spending money on anything else. I'll buy as many bags of cheese puffs as I want because that's like the price of one beer. But she made the caveat. She's like, yeah, but you're still paying like 2 or 3 times as much as what you would ever pay in the US for it. So if you do go, please bring back a box of cheese puffs.
Cheese puffs. Yeah. Yeah, unfortunately, like wine has been one of those, my cheese puff equivalent. We have a friend who runs a Spanish wine importation company. And because all of his customers used to be restaurants, now he's just nobody's buying that anymore on wholesale. So he's been selling all his wine at like 50% off at his like distributor prices, I guess. And yeah, I mean, we're still paying double or triple for the wine that you would get otherwise. But I kind of like you just said, like we're not spending money on other stuff. What else do I kind of have to live for in this kind of like instant reward kind of way? Of course, my dog, objectively my daughter and life is great. But like at the end of the day, when you're like finished work and you're like, oh man, I just want something. And food is also that. Food is great, but not quite as much as something that's, mind altering. And I'm a bit farther down in my life where I don't really partake in any of the other mind-altering things. So wine is my current vice. And I've even tried I was at like a bottle of wine a day with the beginning of lockdown because I was like, fuck it, it's a party. Like, let's do this. And after like a month, it was like, that's getting really expensive. And I'm definitely an alcoholic now. So I've gotten it down to 2 or 3 days a bottle, which I find to be a successful intake.
No, you're 100% not alone on that because so our equivalent has been cocktails. So we don't like drink a lot of cocktails out, but we like to have the odd. And we're happy hour people. We like to go out for a happy hour and we'll go to 86 proof or whatnot. And we'll have an espresso martini or a Negroni or a martini, margarita. Sorry. And so we missed all of that in the beginning. So at the beginning of this lockdown, we bought in a whole bunch of liquor, which we normally don't really have liquor in at all. Maybe one bottle of whiskey, sit in the cabinet for a few months. But we stocked our cabinet full of and nothing really expensive, just all the basics, but like gin, vodka, tequila, whiskey, everything, rum, which is still there because we don't drink rum. But so our thing was making like Negronis and espresso martinis and things like this at home. And similar to you, we were like afternoon. It was like, well, might as well just have a drink. It was like you said, a big party. It's like I didn't think it was going to go on for much longer than a month. And then, it got to that like month stage, and it's like, okay, I'm drinking way too much now. Like this is this is not like it was fun in the beginning, but now like I need to cut back on that. So we could just see. I mean, now we're just back to almost like normal levels. Like have a little drink at night or whatnot. Maybe once a week have a little bit more, but not the levels in the beginning where it's like, we're home, let's just have a party.
I think I realized like it was really potentially getting bad when I got my first COVID jab, and I was feeling pretty shitty the first 3 days after getting it and I stopped drinking also during that period as well.
Yeah.
And like in day 2, I was like really feeling pretty bad. I was like, you know what? Like, man, this is getting to me. And I thought, well, maybe you're just going through alcohol withdrawal because there's a show called Always Sunny in Philadelphia, which is if I was going to have like a Bible kind of text in my life, that would be it. And there's an episode where they all go through like they stop drinking and they're all alcoholics and they all get like really sick. And then one day they just like, one of the characters like goes there and they're like locked in the bathroom for quarantine in this episode. I'm not going to go further into the plot line, but one of them is like, oh, I hide like alcohol under the sink in the bleach container. And they're like, you're an alcoholic, like whatever. And they all start drinking and they go from like all being on the edge of death to like the next scene is all of them just like hanging out. They're like, wow, I feel like really good. And it's like, we haven't been sick at all. We're just alcoholics. So.
And as I said as well, it's not just you, because I've had this conversation with several people, even when I took the dog out, and just briefly had a conversation with another dog owner. And he said the exact same thing as well. It's like, I realized the same as you. He's like, I went through like a bottle of wine a night. And then we were getting into Aperol Spritzes, and we were making like afternoon Aperol Spritz. And then, but same thing about the same timeline. After about a month, was like, okay, we need to calm down. So I think anyone I've spoken to, I think we've all kind of gone through the same process. So look, thank you so much, Brian. It's been awesome. This has been a long time coming. It's been great to catch up.
Yeah,
really good to hear about Saigoneer. Really inspiring as well. For me, as someone who's pushing forward with 7 million bikes, it's great to have you on. It's good to have a chat, and I hope that you and the family are doing well. It sounds like you guys are doing well, and you've kind of got a good attitude, same as me. It's tough, but you know, it's not the end of the world. Too tough. So hopefully we'll get through this. We'll come out soon on the other end, and we can catch up for a proper drink in person at Eddie's with Brad, and he can butcher your name.
fantastic. Looking forward to it. And thanks for having me.
You're very welcome. Cheers.
Yep, have a good one.